Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for the space of the opportunity to share these ideas. So this presentation deals with a multidimensional understanding of critical cosmopolitanism for intercultural language education in the context of migration, and is based on a piece of research conducted in Barcelona in the field of language education for migrant population. And more than presenting here the research and data, I hope it can encourage some discussion about the ideas I will put forward. So in a nutshell, this presentation will deal with some reflections about cosmopolitanism in the field of language education and the relationship with intercultural education. I will present an empirical study very shortly in the context of migration, and then reflect on this multidimensional understanding for pedagogical intervention and data analysis. So to start with, I would like to start with this image by ReDICo and this quotation by Professor Delanty that says that the world may be becoming more and more globally linked by powerful global forces, but this does not make the world more cosmopolitan. And it definitely let us think about what is actually cosmopolitanism and how to make then the world more cosmopolitan. And this coincides with Walter Mignolo's idea that not as a globalization, but cosmopolitanism is not something that is just happening. Someone has to make it happen. So the question is how to make it happen, and especially in language education programs, how can we deal with that? How can we maybe foster these values, attitudes, or performances that can be considered in alignment with this project such as cosmopolitanism? So first of all, what we should have to do is to unpack a little bit what we understand by cosmopolitanism, as Professor Delanty 2 days ago reminded us of. That is a condition of openness that entails self and societal transformation in the light of an encounter with the others. And some other authors, like Woodward and Skirby, give us a definition of what cosmopolitanness and being a cosmopolitan would be in terms of the practices, outlooks, and dispositions, in terms of cultural diversity, hybridity, and it's pretty much a postmodern definition as it looks at it in terms of being flexible, contradictory, emergent, discursive, deployed intermittently, and this is pretty much what we usually have in the frames of intercultural education, seen from the perspective of language education. No? Things about being intercultural, having students or language students considered as intercultural speakers, intercultural citizens, or having this intercultural competence. In fact, this relationship between intercultural communication and cosmopolitanism has been thought from authors like Subredenton and Barnard that tell us that cosmopolitanism actually helps us get to the heart of the central concerns within the field of intercultural communication, so that culture, difference, power, identity, alliance building, and also questioning these divisive cultural boundaries. So cosmopolitanism in the field of language education, there has been a relatively small body of research, small compared to that body of research in intercultural communication, but we also have these ideas of these cosmopolitan speakers, of language students as cosmopolitan speakers or cosmopolitan citizens. However, the idea of competence is something that has been contested in cosmopolitanism, as the very concept of competence is born in more neoliberal world, no? And is something, one of the main objects of critique of cosmopolitanism. So as Sotzman says, competence-based education even is so ubiquitous in contemporary education, in even postmodern and the essentialist perspective of intercultural learners, such as cosmopolitanism, sometimes seem to be in line with these main premises. And the question is, if we accept that intercultural learning or cosmopolitanism is essentially something that is subjective, unpredictable, how can we describe them in terms of competences or outcomes in advance? So in this case, we can see some kind of what we can call the Janusian approach that on the one hand, we need to have some attributes, values, or practical resources kind of defined to see what we want to foster or what we want to value in the language classroom, in terms sometimes as Kennedy, Diaz, and Darcy mentioned, in terms of dimensions like intellectual dimension, identity, and emotional dimensions of cosmopolitan or interculturality. Because as Professor Delanty says, it is not a zero-sum condition, present or absent, that we can evaluate or we can actually see if it's or it's not, but it's always a matter of degree. But the question is a matter of degree of what? So in one sense, we also need to have some kind of ideas of what are the attributes and values, and this can be a contradiction, because if we see something more subjective, dynamic, unpredictable, unstable, situated, emerging, or co-constructed, so this Janusian approach may unveil some contradictions of a modern thinking in terms of a priori categories or dimensions, and some postmodern thinking in which reality is actually dynamic and liquid, and we cannot see it in terms of categories. So with this in mind, we embarked in this empirical study to see both from a pedagogical and epistemological concerns how we can foster the cosmopolitan outlook in language classroom, and what traits of cosmopolitanness can we observe in students' discourses. So the study took place in this educational context, especially particularly in a program for migration of a Spanish class that lasted 3 months with 15 students in the level B1 according to the Common European Framework of Reference. And we try to foster this cosmopolitan outlook through pedagogical intervention that link the linguistic content of the level B1 and some topics and pedagogical approaches as work, identity, migration, and the emerging pedagogies. These ideas and this design, methodological and pedagogical design, has already been published, though in Spanish. If you are interested, here are the references. But here today, I'm not going to deal with this pedagogical intervention, how to promote cosmopolitanism through the pedagogical point of view, but more about the data. And in terms of data that we collected was all about class discussions, these intercultural encounters that we had in the classroom for language practice, and of course, all the oral and written reflections of those discussions and intercultural encounters. All data was analyzed qualitatively based on approaching it through content-based and interpretative approaches with mixed method, deductive and inductive, to see already what we knew about cosmopolitanism, but giving also space of having emergent ideas of cosmopolitanism in the actual practice, rooted in the actual language classroom. So in the next slides, I'm going to show you our understanding of what we can call a multidimensional understanding of critical interculturalism. But it is important to say that this multidimensional understanding is actually a rhizomatic understanding of taken from the post-human ideas, taken from Deleuze and Guattari, on the metaphor of the rhizome, that is something that is not like a tree or arborescent, or more lateral, decentered, proliferating and interconnected ideas and dimensions. And as this idea of the rhizomatic concept of difference is something that is more focused on the becoming, on the not yet known, and all the connections that are made moment to moment in terms of assemblages, heterogeneous assemblages, as Tohi and Smythe reminded us of. So we see this critical cosmopolitanism as an ever-developing entity that stems from critical consciousness and has different interconnected offshoots. So from our data, we see those offshoots related to cognitive component, a social-emotional component, and a transformative praxis components that are all interconnected. But as I said before, this understanding is rooted in the construction that took place in the particular setting of with particular people in the classroom. So it is very situative, discursively emergent, but all the offshoots and these ideas then helped us understand and operationalize in a way, not only for further pedagogical interventions, but also for our data analysis. So here we can see the cognitive dimension or the cognitive offshoot that illustrate these, not only in terms of the knowledge that students co-constructed in terms of the world, the sociocultural and sociolinguistic aspects, but also, and most importantly, the way they see all this knowledge interconnected and interdependent. For example, in here we have a little example by Lalika. She talks about the reality, the linguistic and sociolinguistic and sociocultural reality in her country, that is India, saying that her language, or the language there, is Hindi, but she sees that people speak a lot more English nowadays, and she reflects critically about this English situation, or this linguistic situation, saying that is the fault of colonization. And she says that colonization has the effects up to now and is still increasing more. And then she reflects about the English medium at schools, saying that is also kind of the colonization that is still taking place in terms of the social linguistic environment or phenomena in there. In terms of the socio-emotional dimension, then we have ideas of the values and attitudes that we don't have to explain further, such as appreciation and respect, openness and curiosity, empathy, decentering, but also, and most importantly, the way students are reflected in the way of how identity is constructed. And we can have ideas such as students reflecting how identity is constructed internally within the individual, but also externally in the context around. They reflected about some issues, center and periphery constructions of identity, how identity is constructed in horizontal or vertical ways, that is co-constructed with others, with or without hierarchical or power relations, and how all these identities are actually interconnected and having the values of common humanity. In the examples here, Janina, for example, she says when they were discussing about identity construction, all these examples, by the way, are have been translated because the original were in Spanish, but here I show you the translations. She says that no, not only when we are born says about our identity, but especially the experiences we live, the new people we encounter, they change us because we think differently, showing that this horizontal or this idea of identity construction of different levels. Dasha says that it's not something, identity, how you feel, but how others feel about you. And she gives an example that in her neighborhood, for generations, there is this family, Turkish family, and for generations, they have been there. For her, they are actually Catalans, but for people in the neighborhood, they are always Turks. They will never be Catalans. So it's something like identity construction, something that is more vertical and something that is more external. Leandro says, for example, it would be nice if we say like we are earthlings, not Brazilians or Colombians or Indians, but we're earthlings. We are all from the earth. Like he reflects about this common humanity. And also, finally, from the transformative praxis dimension, that is the last one of the dimensions that we saw in the data or offshoots, that is perhaps something that is more essential to the understanding of cosmopolitan outlook, especially in the terms of these transformative aspirations put forward by authors like Delanty, Professor Delanty. In this case, this critical consciousness leads to a praxis in a Freirean terms, this transformative praxis in this case, and we can see this praxis in terms of how students act as mediators, not only external mediators with others in social linguistics or different terms, but also internal mediators, because as cosmopolitanism, we are more aware of our different layers of identity and our different identities. Sometimes mediation is something that has to be not only external, but also internal in our different selves, no, that compose someone. Also, this transformation can we see in the way students reflect on the encounters as transformative events, the different ways they change their schemes or their previous schemes or their behaviors, and also in the ways they propose counter narratives to hegemonic narratives. For example, here, Joel says, I don't agree with the separation of Catalonia from Spain, but one thing is not to agree, and another thing is see the reason, the repercussion, and the work they are doing is so beautiful. So in one way, he's like in between, dealing with, I don't like the idea of the separation, but I really like the work they are doing, having different selves between among himself. Also, Janina says, okay, when you find new people and they had an intercultural encounter, and then they reflected on that encounter, saying that your mind opens up because you're not alone in your zone, and you think in one way, but you find another person that they can change you. All the things that you have thought about everything the whole life, no, they had a very transformative encounter. And also Leandro says, when they were discussing about the discovery of America, there was this topic that came through. I think it's pure manipulation, because this story of the discovery that everyone celebrates, and it's actually sometimes in some countries it's a party. The truth is it's not a party, it's a killing. And he goes on reflecting on how these hegemonic narratives, has made a thing of something that we can celebrate, especially in some Latin American countries. But for him, he proposed these counter narratives by himself. So I want to finish this presentation on just highlighting the idea of this rhizomatic understanding of critical cosmopolitanism can help us maybe overcome this Janutian and contradictory approach of having dimensions and categories or even taxonomies for description of unpredictable and emergent phenomena. Because understanding cosmopolitanism as a rhizome means adopting also this post-human stance and accepting the situatedness, the rootedness, and also the possibility of observing it from different perspectives, from the different stems or offshoots that are articulated. There is also the possibility of having a diffractive understanding in the terms of Haraway. This understanding from different perspectives or different offshoots can give us a better idea of the whole. But it's rhizomatic, it's also understanding that is incomplete, is ever-changing in nature. It's a process of becoming and not as discrete beings. So this idea of being cosmopolitan is actually the idea of becoming cosmopolitan, as Bharat would propose. So I finish this. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm really looking forward to your insights about this topic and your views on this multidimensional and rhizomatic understanding of critical cosmopolitanism, and maybe the possibilities or usefulness for pedagogical intervention and data analysis. These are the references, and thank you very much. I hope I am on time.